Yields. Chair now recognizes himself for 5 minutes for the purposes of asking questions. You know, what's interesting about this entire debate, we dealt with this in South Carolina when I was in the General Assembly. It shocked me, the polling, when you look at this, the amount of people that support keeping girls in girls sports and men in men's sports. 70% around the country. The American people can't agree 70% on anything. But on this, they are there. They understand it. And it makes common sense. And so, Ms. Gaines, when you travel the country, what are some of the things, the stories that you hear from women who are seeing this in their schools and on their campuses?
Well, first and foremost, to your point, as we see a lot of times, both at the state and federal level, how representatives vote, senators vote, delegates vote, how we see the media portray this issue, it seems as if it falls on party lines. But just as you said, that could not be further from the truth. This extends beyond the political aisle. And that's certainly something I've seen traveling the country, going state to state, talking to women who have been impacted by this in some capacity, whether that be in their sport, whether that be women in prisons who have dealt with male inmates being allowed into their prisons, whether that be, again, the case of the sorority in Wyoming, whatever the situation might be, bathroom instances. As we saw this week, a headline about a male who was allowed to sleep in a bed, be roomed with a woman. And the answer is always the same thing, and that this is harmful specifically to women. It adversely affects women. Again, this whole hearing, we haven't talked about females entering into men's sport because that's not a threat, and it's not happening, and it won't happen because this is only happening one way, and that way is the way that affects women negatively.
Right, and so you look at the polling on this, and we just talked about this, but it's remarkable to me. I mean, this is the success of Title IX. When you have, you know, roughly 300,000 at the start in 1972 female athletes, and now you're over 3 million, people understand what is going on. Your parents understood what was happening in your locker room. They understand what's going on. That's why they're so supportive of keeping a fair playing field and supporting Title IX in its original intent. What are some of the concerns, and maybe not the specific instances, but maybe some of the themes that you hear from women across the country?
Well, one, as we've mentioned, safety aspects, especially in sports that require physical contact or throwing something at one another or collision. These girls are scared. Another thing I hear across the country is women are terrified to speak out. They're terrified to be vilified. They're terrified to be called transphobic or bigots like we've been called in this hearing today for stating our views. And that's a real threat, and I understand it, because since taking the stance that I've taken, my address has been leaked, and since my address was leaked, I've had people showing up at my doorstep. I've had drones flying above my house. I can't even tell you the amount of death threats that I've had that have rendered the FBI getting involved. It's real. The vitriol I've faced, I've been held for ransom for over 4 hours, where these protesters demanded that if I wanted to make it home to see my family safely again, I had to pay them money. I've been hit, I've been spit on, I've had bottles thrown at me, drinks poured on me. Thomas's teammates in particular, they were forced every single week to go to mandatory LGBTQ education meetings to learn about how just by being cisgender, they were oppressing Thomas. And when they were concerned about the locker room aspect, and 16 of these swimmers, Thomas's teammates, sent an email to their administration with their parents on the email expressing their discomfort in the locker room, the administration responded back with, if you feel uncomfortable seeing male genitalia, here are some counseling resources that you should seek in an attempt to re-educate yourself. At Roanoke College...
In light of the time, Ms. Gaines, just real quickly, I know that the locker room situation that you described earlier, do you think that the NCAA is actually working to improve this situation, or is it kind of status quo with them and sweeping it under the rug?
It's certainly status quo. President Charlie Baker testified in front of the Senate Judiciary Committee a few weeks ago, and when confronted with that exact question, you know, what does this policy pertaining to the locker rooms look like right now, he couldn't answer. He didn't know what the policy was. He had to tell Senator Hawley, well, let me get back to you in writing. And I think that's incredibly telling for the NCAA president to not even know the policy as it stands pertaining to locker rooms.
Ms. Perry, you described that the federal government is perpetuating an athletic fraud of unprecedented proportions on students. Do you think, one, that the Biden administration's efforts will actually leave a lasting impact on women's sports? And a follow-up with that, do you hope to see a different approach in a different administration?
I think the best and different approach would be to leave Title IX alone as it was originally intended to be interpreted. There was no ambiguity whatsoever in the definition of sex, and ultimately what keeps us here is our failure to identify biological distinctions between one sex and another. We can use terms like cis or trans all we want, but men and women are different, and the American public knows it, which is why 70% of the American populace wants sports separated by sex. Washington Post, Harvard Harris, Rasmussen reports, all of them across the line, no matter their ideological bent, all indicate that Americans want sex-separated sports. I do have a very strong feeling that this law will automatically be challenged in a federal court. We know that the notice of interpretive guidance has already been seized. It is already now based on 20 states. It is in a holding pattern based on the ultimate release of this final rule. It's a violation of administrative law, civil rights law, and constitutional law, and the ways to challenge it are too long, I think, for the time frame of this hearing today.
Thank you for that, Ms. Perry. And with that, I recognize Mr. Garcia of California for 5 minutes.
Very quickly, Mr. Chair, I'd like to seek unanimous